All right, let's talk JavaScript. If you've ever felt like you're wrestling with it, well, you are definitely in the right place. See, the language that basically runs the entire web, it's had this massive transformation. So today, we're going to unpack the key stuff that makes modern JavaScript such a total game changer for us developers. You know that feeling, right? Where you're just lost in this jungle of nested callbacks? They call it callback hell for a reason. Or maybe you're just staring at your screen, totally baffled, wondering what on earth this keyword is even pointing to this time. Yeah, that was the old way. Modern JavaScript, it just cuts right through all that clutter. It makes our code not just more powerful, but way more intuitive than it's ever been. So here's the game plan for today. We're going to look at the JavaScript revolution, then dive into some really cool tools like arrow functions for cleaner code. After that, we'll tackle promises and async/await to handle things that take time, and then we'll see how it all clicks together with APIs. Finally, we'll wrap up with your new modern JS toolkit. So where did this all start? Well, the huge turning point was this major update called ES6. You might also see it as ECMAScript 2015, and then all the versions that came after. And look, this wasn't just some minor tweak. It was a complete, fundamental reimagining of the language. It was specifically designed to get rid of all those common frustrations we had and just make our lives as developers so much easier. All right, let's kick things off with one of the first things you'll probably notice. Arrow functions. Seriously, they are the perfect example of how modern JS helps us write code that's cleaner, way more intuitive, and with a whole lot less typing. Just look at that. The difference is, well, it's pretty striking, right? On the left, you've got your traditional function declaration, and on the right, that sleek, modern arrow function. We just totally ditched the function keyword. And for simple functions like this, we don't even need the curly braces or the return statement. It's so much more concise and clean. It's a huge time saver, especially for these small, single-purpose functions. And trust me, it really cuts down on the mental gymnastics when you're scanning through a giant code base.
Okay, but the real magic of arrow functions, it isn't just about saving a few keystrokes. No, it's all about how they handle the infamous this keyword. You know how in traditional functions, the meaning of this can just change on you unexpectedly? It leads to some of the most frustrating bugs imaginable. Well, arrow functions solve this, completely. They just inherit this from their parent scope, from their surroundings. That's it. No more guesswork, no more confusion. It's a huge deal.
Okay, let's move on and tackle one of the biggest challenges in, well, all of web development, really. And that's handling stuff that doesn't happen instantly. Think about fetching data from a server, right? That takes time. This is exactly where promises come into the picture. They give us a really solid foundation for managing all these asynchronous operations. So what in the world is a promise? The best way to think about it is like this. Imagine you go to a coffee shop. You order a coffee and they hand you a receipt or an order number. That little piece of paper is basically a promise that your coffee is on its way. It represents a future value, your coffee. Well, in JavaScript, a promise is pretty much the same thing. It's an object that acts as a placeholder for a result that we just don't have yet. And every single promise has a little life cycle. It can be in one of three states. First, it starts as pending. That's your coffee order in the queue, just waiting. Then, if everything goes right, it becomes fulfilled. Awesome, you got your coffee. But if something goes wrong, like they run out of beans, it becomes rejected. And the key thing to remember is a promise can only settle once. It's either a success or a failure, and that's final. Now, don't get me wrong, promises are super powerful. But chaining them together with .then after .then, well, it can get a little messy sometimes. And that is exactly why we have an even more elegant solution. It's called async/await. Think of it as pure syntactic sugar. It's just a nicer way to write the same promise-based code, and it makes it an absolute joy to read and write. So this is what the classic way of handling promises looks like. We'd call a function that returns a promise, and then we'd use .then to say, okay, then do this with the result. And if something goes wrong, we use .catch. And hey, it works. But you can imagine if you have a bunch of steps, you end up with this long chain of .then calls that gets really hard to follow. It can quickly turn into that callback hell we were talking about earlier. And now, look at this. This is the modern way with async await. The magic is, by marking a function with that async keyword, we get to use the await keyword inside it. What await does is it basically tells the code to just pause right there, wait until the promise is finished, and then just give us the result. It reads just like simple, step-by-step, synchronous code. It's so incredibly clean, and it is so much easier for our brains to process. Okay, so we've got these awesome new tools for handling things that take time. So, where do we actually use them? Well, the most common scenario by far is when we're interacting with APIs. That stands for Application Programming Interfaces. Basically, it's how we fetch data from all over the web. The great news is modern browsers have a fetch function built right in, and it makes calling APIs a total breeze. It really boils down to a simple three-step process. First, you fetch the URL, and you guessed it, that returns a promise. Second, you check the response to make sure the network request was actually successful. And finally, you parse the data out of the response body, usually from a format called JSON, and turn it into a JavaScript object you can actually use. And see, each of those steps is an asynchronous operation, which we can now handle beautifully with our new friend, async/await. And it's not just a one-way street either. It's not always about just getting data. We can also send data to a server. All we have to do is specify the method as post and include our data in the request. This is how we can do things like create new user accounts, submit forms, you name it. The Fetch API is really our all-in-one, super versatile tool for talking with the web.
Ooh, okay, we have covered a lot of ground here. Everything from simple syntax changes to some really powerful ways to handle data. So let's do a quick recap of the essential tools that are now in your modern JavaScript toolkit.
So these are really the 4 core pillars we've just explored. You've got arrow functions for that clean syntax and for finally fixing the this keyword. You've got promises, which are the absolute foundation for managing any async operation. Then there's async await, which lets us write that asynchronous code so it looks simple and synchronous. And finally, the Fetch API, which is our standard way of connecting our apps to the entire world of data out there. Look, these features have truly revolutionized how we write JavaScript. They've unlocked so many new possibilities for what we can build on the web. They give us the power to build really complex, data-driven applications in a way that's simpler and way more reliable than ever before. So really, the only question left is, what are you going to build with your new toolkit?